Bonjour. Welcome to Wahsa Lesson's Education Center's radio Zoom classes. This is SVN3E, grade 11 workplace science, and I am Bronwyn Slate. If you'd like to participate live today, you are welcome to call the Wahsa studio at 1-800-465-7144 or 737-4017. You can listen on the radio at 91.9 FM or on the television at Bell Express View channel 972. You're always welcome to join me live through the Zoom link, which is available from me, your teacher, and also your DEC. Our classes are scheduled on Monday through Thursday from 3 to 4 in the afternoon, and we are in our second week of our 9-week course. Just a reminder of what work to submit for marking once you're ready. The key questions are marked with a key icon, and they are located at the end of each of your IL lessons. So in your package that you got from Wahsa, at the end of each lesson, there's a list of questions. So please do all of them. Some of them are check your understanding questions, some are activities, some are review questions. So show all of your work, your steps, your thinking, explain all of your ideas, and make sure you're actually answering the questions that's being asked, and submit that work. You can do it either by hand if that works best for you, or you can do it electronically. You are welcome to write in the workbooks. They're consumables. You get to keep that for your own reference if you'd like, or you can write it on a separate piece of paper, or you can also do it in a Word or Google Doc file. Everyone has access to Google Docs through your NNEC email address. So if you need support accessing that, let me know and I can help you. If you're going to use a different program, just check base with me to make sure I can actually open your file so that I can actually see your work. How to submit your work once you are finished it. So there's 3 methods. The first method is to scan your work in and send electronically. So if you do it by hand, then you can scan using a smartphone, either the iPhone Notes app or the Android Google Drive app. Both have scan functions, so you can do that. If you don't have a smartphone, you could also just take a picture and send your work as well. That's fine too. Then you can send it to either by email to studentwork@nnec.on.ca and CC it to bronwyn.slate@nnec.on.ca, or you can send it to me through Facebook Messenger at bslatewahsa. The second method is to drop your work off in Sioux Lookout. So we have an outdoor mailbox at our location 74 Front Street. We are the big red building next to the post office, and we have a small white mailbox next to our side entrance. Our office is currently closed to the public, but you can just put your work in that box at any time and I will get it and then get it back to you as soon as I can. The third method is to hand in your work to your DEC. Your DEC can either send your work through the Express or fax it to 807-737-1732 or toll-free fax to 1-800-463-7852. If you'd like to connect with me through social media, my Facebook and my YouTube channel are both under the name B Slate Wahsa. So all of our lessons after airing are recorded within 24 hours generally they're uploaded onto YouTube, and I put them in a playlist called SVN3E. So all of our classes information is there. All of our recorded lessons are there. And also I link all of the videos that I'm sharing and that we're watching in our classes. I link those all there as well so that you can access them if you'd like to. Science is really visual. I try to put as many diagrams and images, as well as engage in as many videos and activities as possible to really help make the learning concrete. So if you can't access the visuals either through the Zoom lesson live or watching the replays because you don't have reliable internet, that's fine. Just let me know and I can send you a copy of the recording so that you can still access the material. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact me. This is why I'm here. So my email is bronwyn.slate, which is spelled BRONWYN.SLATE@nnec.on.ca. My Facebook is bslatewahsa. My phone number at the office is 807-737-1488, extension 2209. I don't have access to my voicemail right now, so if you do actually call and try to leave me a message, you won't be able to get a hold of me necessarily. I might not be able to get that to know that you called. So if I don't return your call in a couple of days, let me know, give me another call or send me an email or Facebook message, and then we can try to arrange a time to actually have a conversation. You can also call toll free at 1-800-667-3703. And my office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So I will get back to you within that time as soon as I can. I always want to start our classes off with recognizing my positionality in case this is your first video that you're watching or the first time joining. It's important to know where I'm coming from because that is going to shift and affect the way that I teach. So I, as your teacher, have white settler ancestry, which means that I have white privilege, and the way that I walk in the world is different than many other folks. It's really important that I acknowledge this because if I take that for granted, then I'm going to ignore vast experience of other folks and including the oppression and marginalization that other people experience, which impacts their experience of education and science as well. So I acknowledge that and am working to recognize that within my teaching. I do live in Northwestern Ontario on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people, and so I'm trying to learn from them and the community around me in order to improve my understanding of this land and the communities on this land in order to teach better and to understand science more holistically. This is my first time teaching this course, so I have lots to learn and unlearn. I probably will always have lots to learn and unlearn, but particularly because this is my first time teaching the course, if I'm doing anything that is incredibly problematic or even slightly problematic or concerning, please let me know, and I am happy to take that feedback and improve. Our textbook is also very Eurocentric, so very focused on European ideals and from a colonizer sort of perspective. So this is problematic, and there is potentially some problematic language throughout our textbook. So that's just something to acknowledge, and we can hopefully improve upon that if there is anything that we come across. And it does also ignore, in my experiences, ignores Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis knowledges and experiences. So that is not great. And so therefore I try to integrate as much of that knowledge and experience as I can as a white person into our course material, but it is something that I'm working on and hopefully will improve over time. If you have any suggestions or feedback, again, feel free to pass that along so that I can do better. All right, we're in our Unit 2. This is our second lesson of Unit 2. And so just a reminder that this is the Maintaining Healthy Ecosystems unit. And we talked about ecosystems. We defined them yesterday, our last lesson. So they are healthy ecosystems: clean our water, purify our air, maintain our soil, regulate the climate, recycle nutrients, and provide us with food. So they provide the raw materials and resources for medicines and other purposes that we use. They are the foundation of all civilization and sustain our lives. So it's that simple. We could not live without these ecosystems. So yesterday we talked about, or last lesson, we talked about ecosystems and what they were and how they cycle within them. And today we're going to be looking at carbon footprints and how we have impact with this measuring tool on those ecosystems. So this is lesson 5 of our course, and it's called How Carbon Footprints Measure the Impact of Human Activities on the Environment. All right, so our learning goals for today are such that you can say, I will be able to describe the meaning and implications of carbon footprints, and 2, I will be able to identify the connection between political wealth and carbon footprints. Our success criteria, knowing that we've met those learning goals, are I can define carbon footprints and explain who has the greatest impacts. I can explain climate injustices, and I can explain how carbon footprints can be reduced. All right, so let's first, before we dive in too far, let's make sure that we all know what we're talking about. So what is a carbon footprint? What is it and what causes it? So a carbon footprint is the measure of the amount of greenhouse gases, which the textbook and I may refer to as GHGs, emissions produced by an individual or a country, could also be a business or a corporation. Often they focus on the individual, but it could be measured by, you can have a carbon footprint for any collection, you just sort of how you define it. So burning fossil fuels and deforestation are primary causes of GHG emissions. So forests are carbon sinks because they remove and store carbon dioxide. So the carbon sinks into them, trees take carbon out of the atmosphere. But when they are cut down or burned, carbon dioxide is released back into the air, changing forests into a carbon source. So forests store carbon, which means that they take that out of the atmosphere while they're growing. If we kill them, then that carbon ends up being released back into our atmosphere, and therefore they are a carbon source. That's sort of how you can think about it. So carbon footprints are measured using units called carbon dioxide equivalents, which the symbol of the coding for is CO2E. So CO2, carbon dioxide, E equivalents. There are various different greenhouse gases that affect the atmosphere, but in order to measure them, they convert them all into carbon dioxide equivalents to compare them. So this just gives us a sense, instead of having to think about carbon dioxide and think about nitrogen or nitrates or sulfurates or whatever, all the other things that we could be thinking about, they convert them all into carbon dioxide equivalents so that we have one measure, unit of measure. And so how that's done is the mass of each greenhouse gas is converted to the mass of carbon dioxide that would give the same warming level over a 100-year period. You do not need to know how to do that calculation. That's not important. Yeah, just the important is the idea that there are multiple greenhouse gases that affect our atmosphere, but that the unit of measure to when we're talking with them are all converted to carbon dioxide equivalents. Carbon dioxide equivalents are measured in tons or gigatons. Capital GT would be the units for that. So here is a graphic that shows the global greenhouse gas emissions by sector. And this is from 2020, so not too long ago. This data is from Our World in Data. Online, you can find the source and you can look at it more and other if you'd like to. So this is shown for the year 2016. It takes a while to process data. So though it was published in 2020, it's from previous data. So it's a little bit old in terms of being 2022, but still fairly relevant. The global greenhouse gas emissions were 49.4 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that sounds like a lot to me. Looking at how it's broken down, in the inside of this pie graph, we see that energy industry is 73.2% of the way that we are making greenhouse gas emissions. So that is broken up into energy use in industry, transportation, and energy use in buildings. And then from there, you can even break it up further in terms of energy use in buildings is a combination of commercial and residential. And then transportation shows you road transport, aviation, shipping, rail, and pipeline. And then energy use in industry shows you iron and steel, non-ferrous metals, chemical and petrochemicals, food and tobacco, paper and pulp, machinery, and then other industry. So it just gives you a lot of information in terms of how that energy is broken up. Then there's also agricultural, forestry, and land use. Waste and industry are the other ways that our greenhouse gases are emitted. And then again, those are all, you can break those down further to sort of understand where they're coming from. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of when we talk about greenhouse gases emitted, that they're coming from various ways. We often are talking like we can think about, well, if we just turned off our lights in our houses, then that would have an impact. Well, residential buildings are only 10.9% of the whole thing. So residential buildings in the whole world are only 10.9% of the issue. Yes, they're part of the issue, but that's still a small portion in terms of the entire problem. So just something to think about, that it's not just one little thing that we need to fix. There's lots of different things that are contributing to this. All right, so we're going to watch a video that just explains carbon footprint. I'm hoping that it will work for us today and that our sound will work. Just give me a second to see. Sorry, not sure why it's not working. There we go.
The Simple Show explains the carbon footprint. This is you. You've probably been hearing a lot about climate change and how you should reduce your carbon footprint. But what is that exactly? Just like an actual footprint, it's a mark you leave upon the environment. No, not with your shoes, but with every action that releases carbons. Those are the harmful gases, such as CO2, which are pumped out by burning fossil fuels like oil or gas. The more fuel you use, the bigger your footprint will be. You may think that by driving your car, the only carbons you release come from the engine, but no. Consider the carbons that are emitted just to get fuel into the tank. From the energy needed to extract the oil from underground, the pollution caused by transportation and refinement, to the final delivery to your local petrol station. Not to mention the CO2 released by manufacturing your car in the first place. More than you thought, huh? So unless you live in a cave, you and everything you own has its own carbon footprint. Read a book? Printing and distributing. It uses energy. Brush your teeth, and your utensils will have a history in a factory. Even something as basic as an apple could have traveled hundreds or even thousands of polluting miles to end up in your local supermarket. You see, it's pretty much impossible to leave no carbon footprint behind, but that's no reason to stop trying. Think about your actions and choices, and you'll be able to reduce your personal mark after all. That's how you really put the boot into climate change.
Okay, so that video just sort of helps position it in terms of that it's not just about the actual direct burning of fossil fuels, that when we think about the impact that we have, but also all of the production that happens behind the scenes that we aren't necessarily thinking about all of the time. So at this point, you can do the key questions on page 37, questions 1 and 2, to talk about carbon footprints. All right, so next we're going to talk about what is your carbon footprint, because we all have one. So there's two elements of the carbon footprint, which we've just sort of been introduced to through the video. There's the primary footprint, and the primary footprint is the measurement of carbon dioxide emissions that humans can control directly. The carbon dioxide emissions come from burning fossil fuels, like from cars, planes, factories, etc. The secondary footprint is the measurement of carbon dioxide emissions in which humans have indirect control over. So the carbon dioxide emissions come from the production of products. So therefore we have what we are purchasing and what companies we're supporting are, those ones are how we impact those overall as well. So there is lots of, if you search it online, you can find lots of different calculate your own carbon footprint. This is one that I really like, this ecological footprint from footprintcalculator.org, so that you can go in here and answer some questions that are fairly accessible. And then you can find out what your personal footprint is, sort of. So anyway, what we're going to do is I'm going to go through and answer the questions so you can see how it works. And you can see what my carbon footprint is. All right, so we go in, I'll link this website into the show notes so that you can have access to it. And you click here where it says take the first step. And it is fine if you don't know exactly the amount of all of these things. Even having a rough idea just gives you a general idea of where you fit within the world. So first we have, how often do you eat animal-based products? So beef, chicken, pork, fish, eggs, and dairy products. And there's a slider scale, so you can go down to never, which means you never ever do, you're a vegan. And then infrequently, maybe you're a vegetarian and you eat eggs and dairy but no meat. Occasionally you really like veggies, but occasionally you eat meat, dairy, eggs. Then often you have a balance of meat and veggies in your diet, so you eat meat a few times a week, eggs and dairy almost daily. Very often you eat meat daily, and that is the end. So for me, you can also go in and click where you can get it more specific, and so then you can change these ones as well. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do the general one. But I'm going to say that I often eat animal-based products. And then you go to here and you click on this, and you get the next one. So with under food, how much of the food that you eat is unprocessed, unpackaged, or locally grown? So I would say that this one is tricky because I eat a lot of unprocessed and unpackaged food, but I eat very little locally grown food just because they're where we live. There isn't a lot of locally grown food. So you can go into this where it looks more, you can narrow it down. So I eat probably 0% is probably not realistic, but maybe, sure, 6% is fresh. Wait, no, not 6%. Other way around. Read the question. How much of your diet is fresh, unpackaged food? So I would say probably 93%, whatever. 90% is with food that I eat is fresh and unpackaged. And how much is locally grown or produced? And I would say probably 0, realistically, because it says less than 320 kilometers away. 320 kilometers is about between here and Thunder Bay. I don't really realistically get any of my produce or meat from anywhere between here and Thunder Bay, really. So then they take that into account in terms of how that fits here. Then we can continue. So which housing type best describes your home? Freestanding, no running water, freestanding running water, multi-story apartment, duplex, row house, or building with 2 to 4 housing units, or a luxury condominium. I live in a freestanding house with running water. Materials is your house constructed with? Straw, bamboo, brick, concrete, steel, other, wood, adobe. My house, I believe, is brick concrete. How many people live in your household? So you just me, all the way up to 10 plus people. My household, there's 4 people. What size is your home? So tiny, small, medium. You can figure that out, and then up to large, huge. So you can figure out sort of roughly how much it is and where you fit within that. Then, do you have electricity in your home? Yes. How energy efficient is your home? So hardly, where you have very inefficient, you have poor insulation, few LED lamps, heating and cooling systems are used often. Below average, inefficient lighting, standard appliances. Above average, well insulated, effective lighting and appliances carefully used. Efficiency centered design, passive heating, cooling, advanced temperature control and ventilation, low electricity use. So realistically, mine, I would say, is above average. What percentage of your home's electricity sources come from renewable sources? So either directly or through purchased green power. I had to look this up. In Ontario, about 34% of our electricity comes from hydro, so that's renewable resources. So 34%. Compared to your neighbors, how much trash do you generate? Again, you can improve your accuracy with by going more specific if you want. I'm just going to say less. We're pretty conscientious about that in our household. How far do you travel each week by car or motorcycle? Well, I'm going to say some weeks I travel like not at all, and other weeks I travel a bit more. So I'm going to leave it at, I'm going to say about 150. I'm going to say about 120, 110 a week. Sometimes I maybe travel 10 kilometers in a vehicle because I'm only going back and forth to work. Work isn't very far. And sometimes I drive to Dryden, but generally that's about the extent of it. So I 0 kilometers for a motorcycle. I don't drive on a motorcycle. Then what is the efficiency of your vehicle? So I'm going to leave the motorcycle because I did 0 on that, so that shouldn't affect it. And in terms of the average fuel economy of my vehicle, you can look up. I think mine is, I drive a van, so it is not super efficient. When you travel by car, do you often carpool? This one is hard because I drive with other people, but I drive with people who are my family. So I'm going to say occasionally. How far do you travel on public transportation each week? I'm going to say 0 because there isn't any public transportation where I live. How many hours a year do you fly? I'm going to say 0. I don't generally fly. Then it says you can sign up for a newsletter if you want to. No need to do that whatsoever. You can just skip to view my results. And then here you see that your my results are 3.9 Earths. So if everybody lived with me, we would need 3.9 Earths. Last time I did this, it was 2.5. So I answered things a little bit more generally this time. And then you can go to see your details, and you can see, so your ecological footprint is 6.3, my carbon footprint is 11.3, and my carbon footprint is 62% of your total ecological footprint. And you can look a little bit in terms of how that affects by land type, by consumption, so food, shelter, mobility, goods, and services. Last time my shelter was really high, so it might take a little bit of tweaking to get really more accurate, but it just gives me a general idea. I'm a consumer, so it makes sense that I'm not perfect. I know I'm not perfect. So then you can go through in terms of how you feel, and then exploring your data. You can compare to the other places in, where did the map go? So other places in the world, you can see how many of us, it's increasing across the world. And then they give you solutions, so ideas of what we can do differently to change our population. So that just gives you a little bit of some ideas. Here, this shows, there we go. Here you can see sort of a map of the world in terms of who has an impact and who's responsible. So that's just one way that you can go and check it out if you are interested. Okay, so if you want to do that, that can be something that you can do. That's fun. Now you can, that can help you answer your key question on page 38, check your understanding, number 1. So it sort of talks about, that helps you understand what's contributing to your carbon footprint and what might be contributing to your secondary carbon footprint as well. All right, so then let's talk about carbon footprint inequities. So first, we want to talk a little bit about language, because whenever we're talking about inequities, we can use problematic language, and language is constantly developing. So historically, we've used language like first world versus third world when we're talking about people in different countries and all over the world, or developed and developing, global north and global south, MEDCs and LEDCs, which are more economically developed countries and less economically developed countries, rich countries or poor countries. And all of these are kind of, these are all problematic in terms of who is defining these terms and who is being shown as the strength or shown as the weakness. And there's a lot of history of colonization where white people, European, generally colonizers, have gone to other places in the world and stripped their resources and have forced them to be poor or developing countries or lowerly economic developed countries because of the impacts that colonization has had on those countries. And so this language is all kind of problematic because it positions certain people in the world as weaker or not as on top of things, but really it's because they're disadvantaged because of the actions of colonizers over history. So it's all problematic language to use. This also connects to in terms of how we talk about people specifically. So even within Canada, we still use the word Indian in terms of the Indian Act or things like that, which is incredibly problematic. But also Native, First Nation, Indigenous, different language resonates with different people, and some language is more appropriate to use depending on who you are. As a white person, I use the word Indigenous generally. That's just the respect, how I act to be respectful. The same with black people, so colored people, African American people versus black people. There's language that is problematic and language that we're working towards in terms of how they self-identify. And the same with, there's acronyms out there in the world, so there's BANG, which is Black, Asian, and Minority. I can't remember what the E stands for. Equities? Minority equivalents? I can't remember. I'm off. BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, visual minorities, versus a global majority. So, when we're talking about people who are not white, we often talk about them in terms of how they're in relation to people being white. So the white is the dominant, white is our point of reference, and we talk about people in comparison about that. So people of color, we say, but that's implying that white people don't have color, which is not true. So using the language of global majority, because the majority of people in our world are not white. So historically we've talked about how these are visual minorities, but they aren't actually visual minorities. In most places, there are lots of people who are not white, and positioning it that white people are the people who there are more of or have more power is problematic. So I will be using the language of global majority and white minority when I'm talking in this context, if we're talking about not a specific place but sort of ideas, just in terms of, I think that is, from the research that I've done, the least problematic language, and that is the clearest and most accurate language that I can find. If anyone has an opinion about that or has ideas that they'd like to share with me, please reach out and we can have a conversation. So all of that is to help position about climate justice and how the impact of our carbon footprints and the way that we use fossil fuels and our energy impacts people differently. So the global majority is impacted quite differently than the white minority. And yet the white minority are the people who are causing the climate crisis most in terms of the whole world. So let's watch this video and learn some more. It's a little bit of a longer video.
Climate justice.
Climate justice now.
Two words that we hear more and more.
That climate justice is linked to racial justice, social justice, and intergenerational justice too.
This is why we call not only for climate action, but climate justice.
Two words that could define the century.
There is no climate justice without racial justice. There is no climate justice without gender justice. There is no climate justice without queer justice.
But what exactly does climate change have to do with justice? Aren't we all in this together? To understand climate justice, we need to understand climate injustice. Who causes climate change, and who's hurt by it? Let's first look at who's responsible for putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and heating the planet. Imagine this grain of rice is 1 ton of carbon dioxide. Each year, the average person in Nigeria adds less than 1 grain into the atmosphere. The average person in India, 2 grains. In China, 7 grains. In Germany, 10 grains. In the US, 17 grains. In 1 year,
The average American pollutes 20 times more than the average Nigerian. But the problem with carbon is that it stays trapped in the atmosphere for centuries. So it's not just about how much we add each year. It's about how much has piled up over time. Since 1850, that adds up to about 1,500 gigatons. Okay, so we wanted to pour loads of these rice bags on the table to show you how big that really is, but after doing the math, we realized we need 3 million of them. Historical emissions matter today because countries are arguing about how soon they have to cut their net emissions down to zero. Big polluters like China, India, and Brazil look a lot less guilty when you consider they've only recently become part of the problem.
The tendency is to quote the annual emissions, but that doesn't tell us anything about, why we are in the current place.
This is Prakash Kashwan, a political scientist researching climate justice. He says rich countries haven't accepted how unjust climate change really is.
It's mind-boggling, the kind of inequalities that have brought us to the current climate crisis. They're unbelievable and they aren't talked about enough.
In 2020, researchers calculated how far each country is responsible for pushing CO2 levels beyond a safe threshold that we crossed in 1990. The study takes into account how many people live in a country, how much they emitted throughout history, and includes emissions that cross borders through traded goods. The research shows that rich countries have outspent their carbon budgets. By a lot. The global north has emitted 92% of the CO2 that pushed the planet beyond safe levels. Asia, Africa, the Middle East and Latin America have emitted just 8%. Even a massive emitter like China is only just using up its carbon budget now. But if you live in a country that runs on fossil fuels, this doesn't mean climate change is your fault personally. But some of your choices do still make a difference. Because it's not just about where you live, but also how much you spend. The world's richest 1% emits twice as much as the poorest 50%. And those elites live all over the world. Unequal emissions are one big reason why climate activists are shouting about justice.
Everyone already is affected by the climate crisis, just on a very different scale. But if we look at the people ruling Germany and sitting at these decision tables for the past decades, they have not faced their responsibility.
That is still our environment. I think they need to act now, not later.
But hold up. CO2 heats the planet by the same amount whether it comes from Germany or Kenya. The climate doesn't care about geography. Well, geography cares about the climate. The second part of climate injustice is that even though poorer countries have done the least to change the climate, they're the ones getting hurt the most. Take heat waves and drought. Heat waves are becoming most unbearable across Africa, where droughts are even more punishing for crops. Then there's storms. Warmer air means that hurricanes and typhoons carry more energy and unleash more rain and stronger winds across the tropics. And by 2050, sea levels will have risen so high that floods which used to hit once a century will strike many coastal cities every single year. You can check out one of our other videos to see how some cities are trying to keep themselves afloat. The inequalities of climate change come together hardest in a country like India. Even though its people have barely contributed to global warming, they're among the most vulnerable. India's coastal cities are facing unprecedented floods while its rivers dry up, leaving farmers struggling to grow staples like rice and wheat.
India is one of the most equitable countries in the world, and what we can see is that even if you take a city like Mumbai, when floods happen in the city, it's the poor that are the most impacted.
This is Payal Parekh, a climate scientist who campaigns full-time for climate justice.
Having grown up in a country like India, I grew up with inequality all around me. And this is essentially what it comes down to. The world is very unequal, and it's playing out in terms of climate change as well.
All right, so we're going to pause the video there just in terms of time if you want to check out the rest of that video. at the end of it, you can do that through, I'll link it in our show notes so that you can see it there. So really what's the message that we're getting across is that not only are the white majority, they call it the global north, which is like North America and Europe and Australia, are contributing most to the climate crisis, but they are the ones who are going to be least impacted overall in terms of what's happening so far. So here are some images that just show us this. So the richest 10% are responsible for almost half of the total consumption emissions. So a very small amount of people are responsible for a very large amount of the emissions, whereas the poorest 50% are responsible for only around 10% of the total lifestyle consumption emissions. So this isn't about industry, this is just about personal, but still that is quite telling. Also, I found really interesting in the video in terms of some like historically thinking about it. So not only just currently, yes, there's some places currently in the world who are having a great impact, but historically the US and the European Union have had a really big impact, though China and India are places that are having a high impact right now, but they are, as in the video it says, they have done that more recently opposed to the European Union and the United States, who have been doing it are still having a large impact and have been doing it for a much longer time. So this is a really good map, a really good simplistic visual that shows us in terms of who is at most risk and who is at least risk. So you can see, again, what is referred to as the global north. It's a complicated term. Canada, the United States, and the European majority, a lot of the European Union, and then Australia, New Zealand, Japan are all least at risk. And then Russia and China, the rest of the European Union, are a little bit more risk, and then continues to show that much of Africa is at a lot of risk. Parts of South America, a lot of South America is at risk, not Chile, but Brazil. I don't know all of my South American countries, I'll admit it. India is also at risk, so you can see just sort of generally who is at risk and who's not. This is another really good visual that compares the two. So this top one shows who has contributed the least greenhouse gases are in blue on the blue end of the spectrum, and then those who have the highest emissions are on the red end of the spectrum. So Canada, the United States, much of Europe, Russia, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. Yes, there's some other ones as well, but those ones that are very red, have had high emissions. And then Brazil, much of Africa, India, most of South America, most of Africa are blue, having low emissions. But then if you look on the other side of who will be most impacted, and then we see that here red is the high vulnerability and blue is the low vulnerability, and we've basically switched the colors in terms of who is going to be more impacted: South America, Africa, Southern Asia, whereas Russia, European Union, Europe, North America is not going to be affected as much. So that's just really interesting in terms of that dichotomy. So now you can do your questions, key questions on page 40, the check your understanding questions 1 and 2. So the last piece is reducing your carbon footprint. So I had planned, how long is this video? We have a couple more minutes, so we'll watch a little bit of this video. Maybe.
Hot mess. If you like what you see,
Alright,
please head
so
over to
that video talks about what we can do individually. We don't have time to watch this other video, which talks about individual versus structural change, but the person in the video sort of alluded to this a little bit in terms of how it's about structural change as well as not just the individual choices about using reusable bags or turning off your lights, but also about how our society and how our culture decides to attack this problem. So I'll link this video in our show notes, so you can check it out if you want to as well. But just a reminder that this isn't just about individual choices and action, but also who we vote for and the pressure that we put on companies and businesses and organizations to be aware of this, aware of the issue, not just aware, but also take actual tangible action. So individual actions add up, but structural change is what we really need to make an actual difference. So that's just something to remember, even though we don't have time to go into that video. Sorry about that. So let's look at our highlights for today. So the carbon footprints measure the amount of greenhouse gases emissions produced and personal reflection of how much you contribute to the environment as well. So remembering the inequities where the white minority creates the most emissions and the global majority will be the most impacted. And then the quick touch on reducing carbon footprints that we were able to do in terms of, yes, we have individual impact. There are things that we can do, but it's important to know that it's actually structural change is what makes a difference. So we need to force that opposed to just talking about individual actions. So success criteria is number 1 is that you can define carbon footprints and explain who has the greatest impacts. 2, you can explain climate injustices. And 3, you can explain how carbon footprints can be reduced. This one, you can do the key questions on page 43, the review questions 1 through 12. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can call me at 807-737-1488 or 1-800-667-3703. You can always reach me by email at bronwyn.slate, which is spelled BRONWYN.SLATE@nnec.owen.ca. You can connect with me through Facebook at bslateWahsa and watch this replay, as well as linking into the full videos that we watched and that we didn't have a chance to watch on my YouTube channel at bslateWahsa. My office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 till 4, so you can reach out to me then and we can connect if you want to talk about this more. I'm happy to have a conversation and support you with your key questions. I hope you're able to learn something from this today, and thanks for joining me. Miigwech.